this is your show.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having us back. For those of you who haven't joined the last two DSPs, my name is Ben Liu. I'm a product developer here at PGE. I'm actually going to introduce to you a partner in crime, Jessica Atwater. She just joined my team a few weeks ago. Jessica, would you mind just doing maybe a 30-second intro?
Sure, thanks, Ben. So my name is Jessica Atwater. I use she, her pronouns, and I've been in the energy industry for about nine years, and I've been working with water heaters pretty much that entire time and doing water heater demand response work for the last 4.5. So I'm super excited to be joining the team and supporting this single family water heating DR product. So,
yeah, we're excited that she's here. She has way more knowledge than anyone I've ever met on water heaters, which is great. Shadi, could you go to the next slide, please? So today we have two objectives. From the last DSPs, we got the request to provide some basic information on water heaters and demand response. So we're going to take a step back and level the playing field for folks. And then we would like to have a discussion on some of the design that we've been exploring with folks already, and it's a little bit more concrete now what we think we want to do. Yeah, so could we go to the next slide? So this is a new slide. What you're going to start seeing is this is kind of just the summary of all of the things. So if you don't have time to attend these meetings all the time, or if you forget what we've talked about or why we're doing it, this is a slide that you can reference. We're not going to cover a lot of it because we have covered it in the last two rounds, but I do want to kind of flag the current status on the top right. I don't think I've covered this fully in the past, where the smart water heater pilot, we will be proposing it and filing it within PGE's multi-year plan, and that is scheduled to be filed in August of this year. I believe August 15th, as well as the DSP work. So if you are interested in kind of how that process works, please let us know and we can give you more information. Right now, we are still within stakeholder engagement, so that's this forum. There's other forums that we've been engaging with, and we've been working on testing some of these concepts with customers as well. So if we could go to the next slide, we're gonna take a little step back and do a 101. So for electric water heaters specifically, there's two basic types that we focus on. There's the electric resistant water heaters and the heat pump water heaters. And really the bulk, there's two bulk differences within them, right? So the electric resistance, these are more things that kind of, when the industry kind of talks about, they talk about as like a standard water heater. These have just basic electric resistant elements in them. So there's not a lot of technology involved, which allows it to be a more affordable option to customers. But because there's not a lot of technology involved, it's less efficient. So this is one of those products that if you had a home that was built, you know, in the last couple decades, you kind of have one of these most likely. And you generally know that you have one of these because they have the tubes coming from the top. And when you're an installer, they're pretty prevalent for a like-to-like installation exchange. So it's very easy for installers to just unscrew those, the top tubes, pull out the water heater, and then put in a like electric resistance, the same size, the same height, and then kind of call it a day, right? So it's efficient for the customer because it kind of gets everybody in and out, but it's not really efficient for them in the fact that it uses a ton of energy comparatively to a heat pump water heater. When we talk about heat pump water heaters, that is more of the smart technology that we've been seeing coming out over the last like 10 years or so. And NIA and Energy Trust and other regional experts have been really pushing this efficiency in the market. And kind of how you could think about it is it's very similar to your refrigerator in that it takes the air from the outside and brings it into the tank itself, and then that is what heats the water, right? That process to bring all the air in, and then as a result, it pushes out cold or dry air to the outside of the water heater tank. So that's why it's more beneficial to put it in garages or non-conditioned spaces, because otherwise you kind of have cold air in your home, and that's not what anybody wants. But these are much more efficient. The industry has done a great job at getting them to cycle faster, getting them to heat faster. A lot of them do have backup elements, so there's much more reliability in them now than when they first came out. And the only downside that we've seen is that they're less affordable for the average customer because they're so efficient. What ETO has done really well in this space is they've worked with the new construction market to help them figure out how to make code, Oregon code. They use the heat pump water heater as a cost-effective way to meet code when they build new homes. Now, that's why it's so different, like when we talk about replacements versus new construction. In the chat, there's a question: what are the relative efficiencies? Could you clarify your question a bit?
Yeah, sorry, this is Heidi Caswell. And I was just wondering, you said that the heat pump ones are much more efficient. I was wondering if you have, an efficiency percentage or whatever.
Yeah. Jessica, do you know off the top of your head?
I do. So great question. Heat pump water heaters are typically up to 60% more efficient than a standard electric, and that's because of what Ben was talking about. They're drawing in warmth from the surrounding air instead of creating it with the electric resistance element. So a typical efficiency rating, and I'm going to forget if this is UEF or just EF, one of those two. For an electric resistance water heater, it might be 0.92, and a heat pump water heater's UEF is hanging out around 3. So that means, and anybody who is more technical than me, feel free to correct me if this is wrong, but essentially a 0.92 rating is that it's 92% efficient at converting energy into like heat within the tank, and a heat pump water heater is interestingly 300% efficient because it's taking in that surrounding warmth instead of creating it. So it's taking advantage of resources that exist in the environment, and then has the backup elements to keep up with demand if needed.
Jessica, just because folks might not know, UEF or UF is?
Oh yeah, so I'm pretty sure it's universal efficiency factor. Oh, energy factor, universal energy factor. But if Jeff Wicks is on the line, he could give a much more detailed explanation than I can.
Yes. Did that answer your question, Heidi?
It did. Thanks very much, both of you.
Of course. And then Daniel had asked, what would be the dollar savings? So Jessica, I'm going to pass it back to you. Do you have a knowledge on that?
So we don't have that, like a specific dollar amount off the top of my head. It would definitely depend on the homeowner's like usage, but typically electric water heating is up to like 25% of energy usage in a home. So it's not an insignificant savings, but that is something we can follow up on and include in future presentations.
Yeah. Eric asked, at what ambient outside temperature do heat pump water heaters stop working? I believe that they've been working on getting that temperature pretty low, right?
Yeah. So if folks are familiar with NIA's advanced water heater specification at all, there are different tiers of heat pump water heater. And so there are some on the market that when they're in hybrid mode, they're going to switch over to their electric elements and the ambient air temperature is like 40 to 45 degrees. But a lot of I think most actually of the heat pump water heaters on the market at this point are like tier 3, which means they can generally go down to around like 32 before they're going to switch over to those backup electric elements. So yeah, they can hang with our cooler northern climate temperatures.
Yeah, and Nia's done a great job of really pushing that and testing it in more colder northern climates and proving that it has been working and been reliable to work in those climates. Yeah. Any other questions before we keep going? All right. So, oh, actually, Shadia could get, yeah, thank you. So just to, oh, wait, go back one more. Sorry. So, just to kind of round out the bottom parts of the 101. So in that middle slide, or that middle part where we say the average plans value load shift, that is some planning numbers that we're having some assumptions on, and Andy Iden, I think, is going to talk a little bit more about that in later today. But as you can see, electric resistance water heaters, or actually, let me take a step back. When we look at our demand response planning values, we actually split it up into winter and summer. And that's because, you know, your usage and how you kind of want to heat your water and all that stuff, it changes from winter to summer, right? You obviously want to use more in the winter because it's cold. So we want to reflect that in our planning values. Now, when we look at electric resistance from heat pump waters, as you can see, there is we do account for the fact that they are more, they are less efficient, which allows us to actually have more capacity out of them. Which I know seems very counterintuitive because it took me a while to understand when people explain that to me. But once you kind of think of it in terms of like, well, it's not that efficient, so therefore PGE has more capability to like shift the energy usage or stop it, then that makes more sense, right? And because heat pump water heaters, they're cycling more frequency or for more frequently, or they just don't have to spend as much time heating. We don't get to catch them as frequently. So we have a smaller planning value for them. And, you know, it reflects all in the costs too for customers, where, you know, the heat pump water heaters are anywhere between $1,000 and a couple $1,000s more for the equipment and the installation. It's just the additional complexity for that, right? And so that's why we gave you the kind of the standard 50 gallons and the standard 65 gallons, so you can see what those costs are. And right now, because we're in weird inflation and supply chain issues, we're seeing that the market is continuously increasing those prices to catch up with what's going on. So when we talked to Nia I think last week, maybe a couple weeks ago, they had confirmed, you know, just in the last 12 months, there was 4 pricing increases across the board, right? And we're trying to kind of account for that, but at least they're all kind of shifting together, right? And then just to round it out, Energy Star, it does not have a certification for electric resistance because they believe that technology is already as efficient as it's going to get. And heat pump water heaters, although it is more efficient, they have an Energy Star standard that they certify. And then Energy Trust, they obviously only focus on efficiency, so they only provide incentives for the heat pump water heaters. So I know that was kind of a lot of a 101 to do in a quick minute. Is there any other questions? And did that make sense? All right, I'm going to take that made sense. So we're going to go to the next slide. So we also got asked, how does this kind of fit in the framework of current programs? And what we're going to zoom in on is residential, and then very specifically single family, because residential is made up of single family and multifamily. So on the top in the colored areas, you can see these are we break up our programs into behavioral or direct load control. So when you look at the behavioral, that's like our peak time rebates. those are that is a program that customers receive a notification either through email or text and let them know, hey, between this time and this time, there's going to be an event. Please try to shift any of your energy usage. So standard things that people do is they don't charge their car, they don't take a hot shower, they don't run their dishes, they don't play their video games, right? Like things like that, or they leave their house and they go and have dinner, right? So they bring down through their own behavior the energy usage. Now that is more for customers who don't have these smart grid controlled products, and for those customers, we have them sit in the direct load control programs. So smart thermostats is one we've had for, I don't know, a better part of like 5 or 6 years, I want to say, maybe more. But that is where if you have a qualified smart thermostat, so like a Nest or an Ecobee, PGE, during our peak events, we will adjust the temperature. And we tend to, I think, preheat or pre-cool your home before an event and let you kind of ride out the in relative comfort, right? Then there's the electric vehicle charging program where we stop your charging during peak events. So you could be plugged in, but we intervene on your charger, and we don't allow it to charge during the event hours. And then as soon as the event hours are up, we release it and it can go and charge. Then we have kind of this other space for time of day, which is a residential rate, and that incentivizes customers to shift their energy, their own behavior towards off-peak hours. So those colored blocks, those are ones that currently exist. And then the smart water heater program, we see that as something that will sit in the direct load control space. And it allows us to adjust the water heating for customers, right? We take it into two kind of trigger points. So when demand is low, we'll kind of do some stuff, or high, or high, we also do stuff there. If there's also high renewable generations, we'll intervene with the water heater. But that doesn't mean that the customer has no say in what's going on. So if you are a customer and you are taking a hot shower, let's say, and there's an event that's happening, you're not going to just have cold water all of a sudden. That'd be terrible. So what the water heaters that are out in market now, they're so sophisticated where they can say, oh, wait, there's a call coming in saying there's an event. Is anybody using the hot water right now? If I'm being used for hot water, I'm going to reject that event call, and I'm not going to participate. And that kind of allows the water heater to opt itself out of the program on behalf of the customers, and customers never notice. Jessica, is there anything else that you would add? Because we do this in the multifamily program.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. I think so. When we call an event, I just want to clarify, we actually do call the water heaters that are actively heating to get that capacity back. So the water heater will be off, but because it's a tank water heater, you're hanging out with many gallons of hot water for the duration of the event. But if someone changes their usage, like you were saying, Ben, like they're doing more and there's more demand for hot water, then the water heater will say like, oh, you are at risk of maybe getting that cold shower. I'm going to release myself from the event and allow myself to reheat so the customer is not disturbed. Yeah, technology is pretty amazing these days.
Yeah, it's really cool. So does that make sense? Are there any questions on where we see the smart water heater program sitting within the framework of the programs that exist? Okay, well, we're gonna go to the next slide then. And this is just to recap some of the things that we've already talked about and ground us, right? So this pilot, we're only going to focus on the replacement and new water heaters, so not the retrofits. And then again, we are going to allow the participation of heat pump water heaters and electric resistance. So what I'd like to do is actually open it up for a discussion piece on the next slide. And one of the things that we are trying to design to avoid is stranding grid-enabled water heaters. And what that means is people are buying water heaters every day and they're all going to be grid enabled. And how do we make sure that they're just not left to the wild and kind of not being able to be a resource for the grid? So when we took a look at that as our objective, we also took a look at what does that really mean to be enrolled, and then what does it mean to not be enrolled? And so if we start with being enrolled, I got a lot of questions from folks of, are you trying to do every single water heater ever existing in the service territory? And yes and no, right? Like that is the ideal in the future state, that like 10 years down the line. But right now it's actually really limited. It's limited to customers that have purchased a grid-enabled water heater. So that really means only water heaters that are coming out in mass after code gets adopted. So code is going to change where new manufactured water heaters that are being sold in Oregon that are electric have to have the CTA 2045 as part of the water heater. So that originally was going to get adopted in July because of supply chain issues and some concerns. It's getting pushed potentially to October. So you could have, before that, gotten a CTA 2045 water heater, but you would have had a retrofit for it. So we're assuming that most people are not going to get it until after October, right? The other part that needs to happen is you need to have the water heater get installed by a PGE installer. So I think in the last meeting, we talked about DIY, the DIY space, how customers are, there is a certain class of customers that they do actually go to Home Depot, buy the water heater, do all the fixes themselves. And we're not going to focus on them because the path to change their journey on how they then get some of the other pieces, because the water heater itself doesn't come completely integrated. We need to get them the UCM module, right? So that's why we're going to heavily lean on installers. So when you think about the world of the water heater space, it's shrinking to just that, right? And then we look at the customers that that just allows us to have your water heater be grid connected. And then we look at what does it mean to be opting out of specific events. So you can opt out of a day, multiple days, multiple weeks, whatever is your preference, but we always want to keep the water heater connected for use because it's got a 10-year average lifespan. We also want customers to feel like, hey, if I don't want to participate in the pilot at all, I can remove my participation in the DR side at any time while I live in that address. So what we think will happen is if you decide to sell your home and your water heater is grid connected, we want to have the ability to just automatically connect the water heater again, communicate to the new homeowners that, hey, your water heater is part of this pilot, and allow them the opportunity to remove themselves from the DR portion of the pilot if they want to, but still maintain grid connection. That means that we'll never actively call them until they say, yes, I want to be part of the pilot. So a lot of things have to happen for you to technically be enrolled in the DR side. And when we looked at the non-enrollment, it was pretty straightforward, right? Like you didn't buy a grid-enabled water heater. You didn't have an installer that was PGE associated. You did it yourself, or you declined the install of the UCM module. And we think that that's how we're going to avoid all of these stranded water heaters. I know that was a lot. So I was wondering if there's any comments, concerns, food for thought as we finish up the design work.
While folks are thinking about questions, I'll also offer a new piece of information that is hot off the presses that I think changed in between these slides being due and now. The CTA 2045 standard has been renamed EcoPort.
Oh,
so we're still getting used to that. So you may hear us refer to it as CTA 2045 or EcoPort. We're working on getting used to the new name, but
yeah,
just want to put that out there.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, if folks do have comments or concerns or feedback, please drop them in the chat. We'd be more than happy to address them. And we'd love to hear back if this makes sense. Our plan is to test this concept also with customers and make sure that it makes sense with them, and we'll report back. So just kind of next steps, we're going to incorporate, Jake, you had a question. Where there'll be incentives for connected hot water heaters, particularly for underserved customers. Oh, yeah. Yes, so we're working on what do incentives look like. We plan to front load the incentives to help support first cost concerns. And we are working with Energy Trust and others to decide like how do we structure the incentives where we're also not undermining efforts on energy efficiency. Does that answer your question, Jake? Okay. So Hannah, you had asked, is there a geographic location for the pilot and is it tied to grid constrained areas? So the pilot will be open to the entire service territory. So it's not tied to any particular area. But we would want to focus on trying to promote the pilot and adoption of the pilot in those grid constrained areas. Okay. Shadia, could you go to the last slide, please? So we'll incorporate today's questions and feedback and kind of have them food for thought. We're gonna host in May a ad hoc flexible load discussion, and that's where we'll talk a little deeper around the planning values that we want to do, our DR strategy, and the we're exploring use cases beyond traditional DR for water heaters. And we want to have discussions around that. So if you're interested in being part of that discussion, please drop your name in the chat with your organization, and we'll make sure to get you an invite. And our hope is that when we are able to return for June, we'll have a more solidified design for folks to kind of bounce against. Yeah. So thank you so much for letting us come and having some time with y'all. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben and Jessica. That was very, very interesting. And after our warm conversation about water heaters, let's move to a little thicker topic. We will be talking about our DER forecast, so a little modeling and outputs, preliminary outputs from this model. And for that, I would like to invite my colleague Andy Iden to speak to his presentation. Welcome, Andy, from New Orleans, isn't it? How's the weather over there?
Hi, Shadia. Hi, everybody. Yes, I'm in New Orleans for a conference, actually, where transmission and distribution resiliency is top of mind, and people are talking about demand response and how to increase reliability and resiliency. So I think that's all very relevant to what we've been learning and discussing in Oregon. But it's not sweltering yet, but I packed extra shirts just in case. And I titled this presentation, so hopefully I don't get any Wi-Fi issues. If I do, I might go off video, but hopefully it's working fine. So if you want to go to the next slide, I'm kind of pitching this as preliminary DER forecast results at the locational level because I mentioned in a previous meeting, we've updated the DER forecast with new load forecasting inputs and net metering accounts, sort of enrollments from the last time. We were doing that, wrapped it up in March or end of March, and are moving also at the same time to disaggregate the DER forecast into the substation level for the filing in part 2. So I'm hoping in this session here to kind of review the high-level updated results, give some update on the disaggregated forecast, and show some formats and discuss some of the granularity aspects and get some reactions, hopefully, from how people might want to see this presented in the final filing or the draft filing. And then I think to Jake's point, to the end of my presentation, I'll have some slides that introduce our early work with equity metrics, recognizing that it's a work in progress as many stakeholders, including on the call and also with the OPUC's technical work group, have set that as one of the key areas to improve upon. Next slide. And there will be, I don't have anything in specific on water heaters, Ben and Jessica, but it's kind of, we'll touch on the demand response and flex load resource, and maybe we can dive into that in a future session. So just to refresh here on the slide, these are the past presentations. I'm not going to go heavy into methodology today because you can reference back. I guess maybe they don't say methodology in the title. That would have been helpful. So you can look through the slides there, and there's a lot of methodology reference. And we also, on the next slide, if you want to read the full methodology of AdopDER and how we are working that, and what are the different inputs and results, and sort of description of how to interpret those findings. The full report is available as an appendix to our part 1 of the DSP. But as a reminder, so the study, which we took that methodology and essentially, since we have now a repeatable tool, we're updating the process, updating the inputs for certain select inputs, and sort of rerunning that to make sure that our results are up to date with the latest happenings as much as we can. And so the 4 main resources that we cover in this model are demand response and flexible load, distributed rooftop PV, battery storage, and electric vehicles, as well as charging. Next slide. And as a reminder, we had talked about phase 1 as being purely for the IRP input. It was at the system level. That was kind of our early effort with this model. And then we have been in the process over the past few months of breaking down the forecast into locational variability for the DSP purposes, and to inform our kind of ongoing distribution planning efforts to take a look at DERs and how they may impact different parts of the system. And so that's kind of where we are. I'm going to provide, as I said, sort of a quick update on the top level system-wide DER forecast as we have it today, and then go into the locational results. Next slide. So a couple of highlights of just some updates since the last run of the model. So we updated with the 2021 net metering results, so sort of calibrating that. 2021 was the highest enrollments that PGE has seen by quite a long shot. And so that was important for us to get that in there. And we also, actually the last bullet there is we made some refinements along with NREL to the DGen method that I've covered before, but that's essentially how we get our market share estimates over time. And then we updated for the EV side with DMV registration data. So we received a new extract from the state and rolled that in, as well as the next one, which was kind of a more significant advancement, I think, is Oregon's Department of Environmental Quality adopted the California Advanced Clean Trucks rule. And so that requires a certain percentage of medium and heavy duty vehicles or diesel engines to comply with strict air quality standards starting in, I believe, model year 2024. And then it increases kind of over time differently depending on the vehicle class. And then we also added a couple of new measures and programs to the flex load and demand response, including the single family water heater, which we didn't have as a pilot concept last time. So we added that in, as well as some opt-out time of use and peak time rebates for more of a high case scenario. Next slide.
Andy, we have a question on the chat.
Okay. Yeah, so the DMV, so the AdopDER model that we're using, we implement what's called a stock turnover model, which as we try to estimate how many different technologies can be adopted in a given year, we're doing an accounting exercise to track, if you want to convert from gasoline or diesel engine to an electric engine, then you need to know roughly how many vehicles are being, purchased or turned over every year. And same goes for water heaters, for example, like what Ben and Jessica were just talking about with, if we're focusing on a retrofit or not a retrofit, sorry, replacement, or a new construction, then that means at the end of the maybe 18-year life of a typical water heater, that customer has a decision to make about whether to make an efficient choice or, to put in different equipment. So our model is tracking that, and we do that for all of the DER types. So across transportation, for example, we rely on the DMV data to say what are the make, model years, make and model for each vehicle registered in our service area, and then we use that primarily to give a sense for, in addition to the age and vintage of the vehicle, the weight class. So class 1 through 8. And so that gives us a sense of where there are a greater, concentration of different vehicle sizes. But yes, essentially, it gives us a starting point of, in 2021, what are the registered EVs, which is around 30,000, I think, or 31,000 for PG's service area based on end of year 2021. And then we're also using that to inform how we forecast the adoption going forward. Next slide. So this is all of the DERs kind of at an aggregate level. There's a lot of detail. I think we model something like 50 or 60 different technologies within each of these 4 groups, but most of that is on the demand response side. But transportation electrification, we model sort of a lot of different charging needs, including public fast charging and other residential L2 charging and different levels of charge speed. But this is kind of what this chart is showing is during the summer peak, so PG's summer peak, it changes year by year in our model as the load forecast and the weather evolve, and our model kind of tracks or makes estimates and assumptions about that. But what I did here was each year we kind of pulled out during the summer peak window, which right now is roughly 5 to 9 p.m. This is how many megawatts are on the system due to these different DERs, and the solar in the yellow is actually, that's a load decrease, but I put them all as positive here, and same with demand response. I just put them as positive just to show the amount of resource. And on the next slide, I'll go into kind of the difference of how they contribute to a net load impact. But as you can see, I mean, until about 2030, they're roughly in the same ballpark, and then transportation really takes off after that. And that is a function of sort of that Oregon Clean Trucks rule and just general light duty vehicle market trends that we see a lot of growth potential in there in the long run. 2035 is a key inflection point, and we see California has some rules in place that prohibit diesel engines after 2035 for all vehicle types, I believe. So when we look at, if you advance to the next slide,
Angela Crogley-Cook from OSEA has a question in the chat for you.
Can you break down the numbers for your forecast increase in solar? So this is contribution to, and Angela, are you asking like for the data table behind the graph, or what would you? Yeah. I can certainly send that. I could try to show that. I don't have it in the slides, but.
Yeah, the context is just that given what you just said about the record increase in installations this year, it seems like a pretty small increase, but maybe that's only because it's compared with electric vehicles.
Yeah, I think it would change on the scale. And another note to keep in mind is this, because it is showing 5 to 9 p.m., that and this is an average over that window. And so it sort of, as even in the summer, as you get closer to 9 p.m., I mean, you just get less output. Solar's output is maximum around 12 to 1 and that type of thing. So yeah, I was thinking of maybe showing the nameplate kW or megawatt of solar as well as just the hourly, but unfortunately I didn't include that in this presentation, but I'm happy to provide that in the next run or the next meeting. And if we get to this
evening hours, that makes more sense too.
Yeah, and so I was kind of struggling with how to convey that. I just kind of wanted, so yeah, but it is, I think this is a useful view because then when we do system planning, I mean, on the IRP side, the resource decisions sort of integrate how these different resources contribute during those peak windows, and because those are when we have a higher expected loss of load event or probability. as it goes out through 2050, I mean, that will start changing as you get more solar and EVs. Actually, one thing to note, I guess, part of the demand response is actually part of that is smart charging, and so we've broken it out here in kind of a way to show the standalone impacts. But for example, some of the EV load that we're just showing here shows up as well as a load reduction possibility in the demand response curve. And so that, still working on how to convey all that information. But Angela, if we have time at the end, I can sort of throw some numbers in the chat for this, or if it's better, I think it might be better just to show in a future iteration kind of a resource specific breakdown with some of those like specifics.
Andy, there's a couple more questions on the chat for you.
Okay, Danielle's first is, are all these non-water heater flex load programs up and running, or are they still in the pilot phase? That's a good question. So we are modeling both pilot and future and kind of current running programs. So it's kind of all of the above. It's a potential assessment. And so we're trying to show based on, credible other programs that we've seen work in the market and that we have plans to implement or want to be thinking about. So we do kind of, for a pilot phase, we sort of ramp the based on historical adoption based on our customers, and we have about a 5-year pilot window where we don't require it to be cost effective, and then after that we model cost effectiveness constraints. And so I'll show in a few slides, I have a screening or showing the relative difference there. So it is kind of trying to, because it's really hard to know in 2030, 2040 timeframes what new technologies might be on the market. So we kind of take a broad lens, and this is, energy efficiency does this as well, as kind of you want to include some amount of emerging technologies, because honestly, one of the reasons to do an exercise like this is to inform product developers like Ben and Jessica, like if there are things out there that really could contribute to meeting system needs that we're not currently working on, and where should we put our relative focus based on like orders of magnitude and what seems promising. These numbers are always sort of fuzzier the farther out you look, and it really has to circle back with that short-term program planning. And those details we can provide in the report as well about like just which ones are in pilot phase and how long have they been running, and which ones are sort of emerging, so we can have that view for sure. Solar PV, Hannah, is rooftop residential and commercial. So it is roof. We have some amount of campus microgrids that's in the solar PV, which could be front of the meter, but we're not. We do have actually for the. I'll get to it maybe in the later slides on the locational forecast, but we've added a community resiliency microgrid just for putting that in there, that we wanted to start modeling how that might contribute to different system benefits at parts of the system. But that would be front of the meter solar, but it's not something that's in this is a market demand forecast. That one is more of a technical potential, like where could you put solar and storage front of the meter. This is cumulative, Jenny, and yes, so the peak increases. So this is all kind of on the DER level. This is sort of, but if input to our model is the corporate load forecast, and so again, back to the stock turnover framework. So as the corporate load forecast projects, new customers to be added to the system, and those would add load, that increases the pool essentially of people that we could either see adopting vehicles or solar or enrolling in a flexible load program or something like that. And so that is, this is kind of just the DER portion of that, but we can talk to sort of how it overlays with the load forecast as well. And it, like I said, the peak itself does shift, but that's, there's a lot of, that's more of a probabilistic exercise of what hours the future peak will be once you get out. 2040 and 2050, I think that'll be really interesting work. That is kind of, some more light will be shed on that, I think, as we run through the IRP and Clean Energy Plan running up to HB 2021. And maybe Sam can touch on that later, not to put you on the spot, Sam, but or we can, happy to follow up, I think, Jenny, in a future session on that. Okay, next slide. That was a bit of a tangent, but I don't think I had enough slides to cover a full hour, so that's fine. And this is just kind of from the same chart, like a different view, taking 2030 as a slice in time to show how these kind of impact net load. So we start on the left with load additions. So those would be load growth due to transportation and building electrification. And again, for building electrification, we've modeled sort of using NREL's electrification futures scenario, just the reference case, not showing any programmatic influence here or code. And so that's something that we look at in a sensitivity scenario, because we do see, we do want to be prepared for if that picks up steam and we see a lot of movement around the country to point in that direction. But for this 35 right there for the building electrification, that's the NREL reference case only, sort of naturally occurring building electrification. And then demand response and flexible load kind of comes in to reduce that. So you add load with these two other forms, can shift or reduce load during a system peak with that. You know, like Ben and Jessica were talking about water heaters, and we look at the thermostats, we look at commercial and industrial load curtailment, other programs like that. Battery storage is in there as well for what's cost effective, not the technical potential of battery storage, which is much larger. So, and then distributed solar PV, you can see there as well, 46. Again, that's the same, Angela, the same average during 5 to 9 p.m. So, you know, we're going to be continuing to do some work on the 8760 profiles, and hopefully that is something we can share in a future meeting to show how those, you know, because I think we're going to be aiming to evaluate different benefits based on that holistic contribution over the full 8760. But that's something we're still working through. And let's see, I think that was all I wanted to say on this slide. But yeah, the general takeaway is, you know, by 2030. It obviously, based on that previous chart, you know, the story changes when you get out to 2050, but there's also more uncertainty out that far. And so by 2030, though, which is kind of the next milestone, we think a significant portion, you know, of the TE expected load growth could be managed through these other demand side programs. All right, next slide. This is just on that flexible load and demand response. I wanted to show, again, Ben and Jessica mentioned the summer and winter, and so I broke those out here and showing we call it all achievable versus cost effective. So we put a cost effectiveness screen in the model, and that's the lower bar there. And you can see in the long run, I mean, that's, you know, in summer, that's about 150 megawatts versus about 100 plus, maybe 120 megawatts in winter of demand response potential that we've modeled that is not cost effective. And so one thing the IRP will be doing is taking these resource curves, the costs and megawatts that we project for each year from sort of the top line of like, what's if we weren't putting a cost screen on things using our existing total resource cost methodology and instead, you know, ask the IRP modeling, portfolio modeling exercise, like if there are other reasons or values that could make it beneficial to add into a portfolio. That's some modeling that we'll be doing as well going forward for the 2023 IRP. And things that are in there, for example, are, you know, for our energy partner small commercial program, the small commercial thermostats is kind of a non-cost effective resource that has, you know, good potential. Also things like cold storage for commercial and industrial uses with either chillers or cold, like distribution warehouses and places like that. Some of those are just because they're more costly, they're emerging, and so maybe the cost will come down over time, or if we find different system value, then that can change relatively what the willingness to pay is for those resources. Yeah, so it kind of changes over time, Angela, as it kind of is indicated here. I can try to get that number and throw it in the chat as well, but I think in the if you're looking at the long run, I think it's about 350 megawatts of cost effective for summer, and then about 500 megawatts. So that's about 150. It looks like it's a little north of 350. And I can try to throw that in the chat as well. I don't have the table in front of me, but I'm happy to pull it up and send that. All right, so I think, yeah, that's the last on the top level slides. And then I wanted to transition and show some of the, I guess, one thing before I get into the locational kind of view of things, since this is a new process, we're kind of learning in real time how long it can take and how that it's a lot more work to QC 600 or so feeders than it is, one IRP forecast. So it's been a challenge, and so that's partly why we're still working through it, and this is kind of framed as preliminary. So I think we'll be continuing to review these results and put them into different shape for the filing. But this is something we wanted to put out and just get people's reaction, and shows how we're kind of thinking about it currently. Next slide. All right, so we are modeling gross and net load impacts at each feeder. Our model kind of does two things. It takes the AMI data that we have and does some weather normalization on the AMI data, as well as takes the corporate load forecast and adds individual customers. And so the way we add those customers is we sort of for Schedule 7, which is our residential customers, and Schedule 32, which is small commercial, we take a 10% sample by feeder and then create a sort of normalized or prototypical load profile. And then as we add new customers, we kind of, based on that feeder characterization, we add those, basically say if there's 500 new customers coming on this feeder, then they get that feeder's average residential load profile. And then for larger customers, Schedule 83 and up, then we model a full sample. Each customer gets kind of their own load shape based on their NAICS code and for their own site. Oh, dang! There's an alarm in my thing here. I don't know. I might have to evacuate the building. Sorry. Let me check if there's safety moment. Talk amongst yourselves.
Thank you, everyone, for being understanding. First, safety first, like Jenny stated it in the chat. Let's give Andy maybe a couple minutes to assess the situation over there, and otherwise we would be nimble and we can take our break and then go back to our next presentation. But let's have a couple of minutes to assess the situation. Okay, so it's a drill. So that means Andy has to leave his hotel room and exit the building. Where there you go. No boring day at DSP, and you guys. Let's be nimble and adjust to this. We will get back to Andy's presentation when he comes back to his room. In the meantime, why don't we take a coffee break before we go into our next presentation? So should we say, let's meet in 10 minutes, stretch our legs, refill our beverages, and we will be talking about some our community workshops, lessons learned for next. And after that, we might be able to have Andy back, or maybe Andy would be at the end. But appreciate your flexibility, and we'll see you at 10:17. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. We have Andy Iden back. Safety first. So, safe. Did you get some beignets while you were on your drill?
Unfortunately, the only thing on the street is Starbucks, but yeah, no, I apologize. I mean, I always freak out at home as well, even when the smoke alarm goes off. Like I have tinnitus, and so that like loud buzzing like drives me nuts. Even though it's a test, I still like act as I'm all panicked, and it was pretty funny. Everyone else was just like chill outside, like going down the hallway, and I was like, oh my god. All right.
Well,
so yeah.
There you go. Let's carry on with your
Yeah.
slides. Where were you?
Yeah, I think I was on the second. Well, I want to finish up a few things on that slide real quick.
Great.
So, yeah, as we do this for each feeder, and we're weather normalizing as well using Caltrac open source methods, so that allows for additional visibility into weather sensitive dynamics by feeder and how the loads might be comprising that. And what I'm showing on the right is just a snippet of I guess 12 different feeders. These range from like 2 to 8 megawatts, which might be a typical loading range for a snapshot of the feeders. And you can kind of see the shading where the orange line is net load, and so the light orange shading is DER growth, and then the ones that dip under are due to solar and other fluctuations reducing load. No, just to give a snapshot, I think we're trying to come up with creative ways to integrate that, but it's a lot of data. And so that's something that I think as we find more use cases for this and how to showcase that and how it really impacts either product design decisions or operations on the grid or planning on the distribution system, we're hoping to have that be an evolution that takes place. Next slide. And this kind of just showing demand response by feeder. So I didn't kind of give any indication here. It was just the horizontal axis there is just all 550 plus feeders that we've modeled in this run, and showing how relatively the average is around 500 kilowatts, or that's about 0.5 megawatts. But some range up over a megawatt or two if they have sort of a larger customer enrolled in the energy partner program, for example, or if they have relatively better, or if they're better suited, to be eligible for things like the water heater program or thermostats, which kind of depends on, the underlying customer characteristics and building stock. But this, is just to show the variation. It's not a very easy or useful way to visualize geospatially. So the next couple of slides, I wanted to just show how we're starting to integrate this into formats and really use that as a touch point. But again, these are we're still exploring best ways to communicate this. So if you want to go to the next slide. So transportation, the numbers here, I don't want to focus on the megawatt impacts because in fact, I mean, this graph was built off of one of our draft runs, which we made some updates and changes before. So just to indicate though, these are kind of the polygons. I think this is basically using the DER readiness map layers, which you all would be familiar with, that we've used before. And so I think this was trying to replicate something like that to show differences in transportation locational load impacts. And again, back to the DMV question. So this, we did some amount of review, and I mean, we did address matching of the DMV data to our premises. There are a certain amount, we got 80% match rate with that, and so the rest are kind of allocated across the service area. But one thing that we hope to really do, I guess, this summer is with that DEQ rule. I believe there's a public reporting requirement because the challenge is if the fleets are not charging or depoted. If they're not charging at a depot, that's where they're registered, and that can be different. And so this is kind of an early stage look at what is going to be an evolving, process to really get more confidence around where the large fleets that will add more of that high speed charging load to the grid would locate. And so hopefully this summer, I think we're going to try to incorporate as much as we can of that publicly available data really hone and get more confidence in the locational factors here. And on the next slide, I think is a different. Let's see. Oh, sorry. So I guess there's another map coming up in a few. But when we get to, I guess one thing echoing back to, Jake, what you've been saying for a while, and Verde, Oriana has raised this as well, wanting to see how the thread can really weave through all of the DSP requirements of community equity metrics and really focusing on community benefits. And we see the non-wire solutions as a good touch point where all of that might come together. There's other aspects of the Part 2 filing, I think, that will also speak to this. And of course, it will be an evolution. But I just wanted to highlight, as Nahid has mentioned in previous meetings, we were looking at a subset of the heavily loaded feeders or equipment to try to put forth the pilot concepts for the non-wire solutions for the filing. And so this is a snapshot of the 5 that we've looked at for just in 2025, looking at that DER forecast that I kind of talked at the system level, and I've tried to break them up into just some typical ones. It happens to be mostly residential load on these ones, which that's why you see the potential mostly here in peak time rebates, thermostats, and water heaters, and also solar plus storage. This is the reference case I should mention. So what we're showing here is housekeeping's at the door. This is funny presenting in a hotel, but what I would like to say is we're going to be taking a look at the deferral incremental value of saying, we have a dollar amount that is going to go into a traditional solution, and we need to investigate how we can drive further DER adoption based on deferring that need. And so that's where the community investment piece can really fit in. And I think we're in the process still of evaluating the sort of risks and costs and benefits for purposes of the filing. But this is just, again, kind of that narrative of using AdopDER and this resource forecast to inform this locational planning. And as I said, this is kind of what came out of the model and the reference case. And we also are going to be looking at a high case, which includes greater potential incentives for that locational benefit, and might make more of those resources cost effective. So if you remember that slide I showed where in the long run, there's 150 megawatts or so of non-cost effective resources that would add to the benefit here, or add to the eligible kind of candidate resources. And then we need to layer on top of that sort of programmatic or go-to-market designs to achieve that DER or non-wire solution. And then I do want to, well, let me go to the next slide, I think, and then the 5 non-wire solutions I can switch to a map and show if we have time. But like I said, we looked at the feeder level breakout, how there's variation and in TE and demand response. And so one thing we're doing is to really try to integrate with the theme we've been hearing is not just show generic equity data or things like that, but really show how is it going to integrate and impact the utilities planning process. And so that's going to take some time to evolve and really get synced up. But what we're bringing alongside right now for purposes of joining the ongoing processes is to really highlight the different data sets that are available. And I'm looking at it right now from the point of view of DER forecasting, so the AdopDER model. So looking at what type of inputs does the model need, what is available out there. So we did a process here with Cadeo to review customer data that PGE has and demographic, environmental, and resiliency data that is both PGE and third-party data. And I'll show some of that in the next slide real quick. But then we want to kind of funnel it down to review and assess these for reliability and how they, like, I guess, reliability of the data, not of like the reliability metric, but if it's a good data set, if it's got some issues or challenges, and which ones we might want to include for different use cases. And involved in that is some correlation research, because many of these may be correlated variables that, depending on your use of them, they may give you the same answer. And if you're doing like a regression model, for example, then you don't want to have collinear variables, which is just a term for correlation, and you'll get mixed signals based on what that data is telling you. So here's kind of a view of the different buckets, like I said, and the data source. the ACS is the American Community Survey. That's the census data. And then we've got in here like the DOE lead tool, the EPA's EJ screen tool. One of the things we did here for environmental and demographic variables in particular is we leveraged the staff recommendations under the House Bill 2165 for TE investments. And so those are in here as well. That's 7 criteria that we've listed, and as you can see, there's a lot more than that. So that we're looking at, and resiliency, for example, I think we're trying to leverage things like Dogami and also PGE data. So looking at both state and utility specific data and taking kind of a survey of what's out there. But again, this is going to be an ongoing conversation. So recognize that this will change and it will be a source of dialogue. But I think we're trying to start with the root, the bare piece of like integrating it into our DER planning, so that can go in and inform the company's actions. Next slide, which is I think the last one. Okay. Oh, you said I have time. Okay. Thanks, Shadia. She's giving me.
You're good in
like,
time. Yeah, you know, we added the break before, so you have those 10 minutes.
Well, I think this is my last slide, and then I did, I'll leave it to you, Shadia, if you want. Misty has developed a map actually showing a lot of this equity data and the non-wire solutions areas that I think would be something we want to show. But what I have here on the slide is just an example of the EPA EJ screen tool, breaking it out. What we did was we matched, each premise in PGE service area with the census tract, and then that's how we joined a lot of the data, which, when we looked at the GreenLink tool and other tools which stick at the census, and then what you have to do then is, in order to break it along the PGE specific like feeders, if we want to ask questions like, well, of this feeder or this substation, what's the equity metric telling us? You kind of have to do some kind of ratio there, and so we've joined them at the premise level to say this group of homes is associated with that census tract, and that is a bridge to a lot of that data. And so what you see here is a particulate matter 2.5, just one of the air pollution criteria thresholds that has been linked in the literature with high impact on things like asthma and COPD and other things. And so I think, Jake and other, like, you've been kind of reinforcing this over time. And I think what was really striking to me was when just looked at this, I mean, the I-5 corridor, just a huge obvious trend there with proximity to that. And, of course, I mean, this is just using the EPA's tool, so I'm not vouching for sort of that without having, really looked at it. I would be, but this kind of does go along the lines of the transportation use case that we're trying to, get this data in a centralized form so that whether we're talking about the DSP filing or the transportation plan filing, which, I think as everyone's aware, we, I think proximity to air quality issues or like that environmental justice lens is in the recommendations, at least that staff has made it. And I think that was based on, community surveys and feedback. And I'm sure some of you participated in that docket process. So, we're trying to integrate that work here as well, so that we're kind of using similar lens on things. And I think that's my last slide, and I'll be happy to take a quick question or next step, sorry. And this is something, so I did talk with Energy Trust, and we're working on a methodology to get because this is very focused, what I just said, on sort of the flexible load, demand response, the transportation and the solar and storage, and then also in the filing, included in the DER definition for 2005 is energy efficiency. So we'll be looking to disaggregate that forecast down to the substation level as well. And then ongoing is writing up the report section and sort of narrating the methodology, how it intersects and interacts with traditional distribution planning processes. And then also we're taking these results and now beginning to incorporate them into the 2023 IRP modeling, which kind of, again, gets to resource adequacy and portfolio optimization. So really understanding how these DERs can contribute to system reliability at the bulk power system level, and then how they fit into the optimum portfolio. And we're going to be, as I said, integrating the TE portions of this work into the TE plan to make sure we're consistent there, and there's a lot of shared interest and overlap. And then we're going to continue to make model refinements. I've kind of touched on in the past technical work groups some of the work with like low-income solar, for example. Angela, you had raised that, and I did bring that up, I think, to Jenny, if you're still on the call. I mean, we talked about it briefly at a check-in with PGE and Energy Trust, and I think tried to ask what's the process there. I think with the low and moderate income example for residential, how can we start reflecting that, and hopefully we can get some time in May to sort of have some good headway on that before the filing gets fully going, or before it gets filed. Hopefully we can touch on it and speak to that in the filing in some way. And then we're going to be iterating with the community workshops, which I think we're going to give an update on later in this meeting. But so that's part of our community education, community outreach and education around like breaking down the complex technical subject matter of this DSP process and making it a little bit digestible. And then some different version of what I just kind of shared, probably more common language around what we're doing with non-wire solutions and how these resources can really contribute to community benefits. I think will be part of that narrative. And I think that's it. So yeah, happy to take a few questions, or I know I interrupted, so if you want to move on to the next presenter, that's fine.
We're good on time, so let's provide some space for people to digest all this content. And we have somebody with their hand up. Daniel, would you like to speak your question, please?
Yeah. Going back to an earlier slide that you had said that you'd shown, I was wondering what your plan was for gross load at the substation level. Like you'd said that you were trying to collect it, but I was wondering, what are you planning on doing with it?
I missed the first part of that, but I think I heard you say, what are we planning on doing with the gross load at the substation level?
Or the feeder level, more specifically. I assumed that feeder as opposed to substation. But
yeah, we did evaluate how the bottom-up AMI kind of reconstituting, a feeder profile matched with the SCADA data. So we did some comparisons there and some sampling, and identified some areas for improvement around, especially front of the meter solar, and other issues about syncing, those two data sets. But I think, it was, first of all, I think the primary reason was it was a requirement in the guidelines was to do bottom-up load forecasting and things like that. So we kind of made this as our first effort into that arena, recognizing it will need to merge and shift with an ongoing evolution of load forecasting across corporate load forecasting and distribution planning to really get DERs better integrated into the workflow, I would say. And our distribution planners, I think, well, what we would like to do is have a better way to disaggregate the net load from the gross and the sort of DER impact, as just a way to, both plan for minimum load allocations for if we're doing hosting capacity or something else, or just the trends in gross load themselves. Like that really gives us a better sense of what the DER potential is. Like if you're talking about demand response, someone may have solar on their roof, which is, if you just look at the net load profile, and then some of our demand response measures, for example, would be a % of load reduction. So maybe a 10% load reduction from some intervention versus just saying here's a per unit like kilowatt number. And so understanding how customers actually engage on the gross with their consumption patterns, and how that can be changed through different programmatic interventions. That's kind of one of the reasons to do it. I think generally at the feeder breaker level, it's just it allows us to then really tease out and get our modeling improved, or we can say, here's how the weather dependent loads are really changing as we especially move into more advanced, climate risk modeling and things like that, which that are now more and more on the table, or I guess, it's more important to kind of catalog those. And so and then as I said, isolating the solar impact. There's also advancements in modeling around how does, maybe it's the day ahead basis, or maybe it's the annual basis or the monthly basis, but basically reducing your error bands around your net load forecast based on these two individual things, like the load and the generation, is I think going to be increasing in importance as we get more solar on the grid.
Are you having much luck incorporating line losses into the gross load aggregation?
I mean, that was the reason that we took the approach of trying to take the AMI data and merge it and calibrate it to the SCADA. And so I think the story is a mixed bag there. So yeah, I'd be happy to talk with you if you have ideas of how to incorporate that better. But I'm not going to speak to, I guess, how PGE might do line loss studies, which we conduct periodically. But this was a start in that direction for a different purpose, I would say. So that wasn't our express intent. It was kind of a potential output, but I think we have some work to do to really standardize that.
Any other questions for Andy?
Yeah, I think Jenny, I echo, I think what he was saying is, yeah, it took a while for me to turn around to this feeder level forecast. And so now I'm going to be moving back into some of that other stuff, and he's going to help with that as well. So hopefully we get that shortly. And I think what we didn't have last time, but I think Nihid has done since then, or is close to having done, the Ruby junction analysis we showed last time, that was sort of PGE data. That was before those slides that I showed with our recent work with Cadeo to sort of expand that data set of incorporating these different DEI and equity metrics and environmental and reliability metrics. We didn't have that fully fleshed out and mapped to the feeder and census tract level. So now that we have that, we can potentially look at that. And Misty on our team has been doing some work on that as well. So I think that's going to be part of the story going forward. Alex, for disaggregating energy efficiency. So Peter Schaefer from Pacific Corp and myself and a few others, we met with Energy Trust a couple of times. And so we've been talking about ways to do this that kind of meet the needs currently, and then don't try to get beyond, I guess, the current state. And at least for our view at PGE, I mean, it makes sense to, at minimum, go to the revenue class level. If we say we know that there's a certain amount of residential energy efficiency that comes from the long run energy trust forecast, we can, at minimum, allocate that based on revenue class of how our customers are spread across different feeders or substations. And then beyond that, if there's any more segmentation we can do around building type or building age, because there is like new construction versus retrofit for energy efficiency as well, just like Jessica and Ben mentioned. So we're exploring if there's finer tuning we can do, but I think, and something, that I looked at the California working group level for distribution resource planning, they sort of have recommendations as well for energy efficiency to sort of take, even just a simplistic, here's your average megawatts at the system level, and then allocate that by the share of load at the substation level. And so there's a couple of different recommendations people have made. It's all kind of moving towards, as you get better statistical models that might be able to train those adoptions on different factors, then you can move that direction. But it's something I'm interested in. I don't know if we'll get fully there on this round.
Thank you so much, Andy, for that presentation. And if anybody has any more questions for Andy or comments, feel free to email them directly to him or to our DSP inbox. So we're ready to go our break. So we will continue with reporting lessons learned from our community workshops. For that, I think that in listening to what Andy was saying and this whole process that we are engaging on, it's pretty apparent, you know, that not everybody can talk technical. And if we want to have a distribution system planning process, a process that is equitable and it's open to everyone, we need to make sure that we address that by creating potentially, that's how we have addressed that, a different venue where we can talk about these topics in a way that is more approachable, in a way that we all are learning about it. And I will be reporting on that effort that we have launched ourselves as PGE. And for that, I think it's important to revisit, you know, where does all these come from? It comes from our community engagement plan that we wrote with the help of community for our DSP Part 1. And we're using it as our guiding principle to engage communities, to use the equity lens that we stated in our community engagement plan. And for that, we are exploring DSP Part 2 requirements and what the call that it has for community engagement. And we would like to report on how are we interpreting those requirements and engaging community in them. So I'm not going to go through this super thick slide into detail, but I think the key message here is we have as PGE a commitment, and we stated it on Chapter 3 of DSP Part 1 in our pillar of empowered communities, to enable equitable participation in this clean energy transition. And I will read this. Empowered communities represents the company's effort as an essential service provider to both engage and understand where our communities live, work, learn, and play, as well as co-develop solutions with them that provide direct community benefits and access to clean energy. So I think that there's a lot of very strong words in this paragraph here, but I would anchor ourselves into where do the people that we serve live, and how can we bring everybody to the table to transform our distribution system planning process with their voices included. In our chapter of empowered communities that we're using as a recap, I think human-centered design and planning, it's another key concept that means bringing people to the table, potentially people that have not been at the table before. And for that, how do we engage with them? Making it relevant to them so that they can share their voices and learn together. Use our equity lens to figure it out. What are the things, what are the gaps that we need to work on? And we have a community engagement spectrum. And I think it's important to acknowledge that this is not something that you do over one round of a DSP. This is something that is going to take a long-term commitment. So we have committed to changing and being a better partner to our communities, and we're moving along this spectrum. So for DSP Part 2, the focus is to develop competencies for ourselves as PGE. And for that, on how to engage with communities, how to talk about these very complex topics that we are talking for 3 hours in this meeting. And for that, we have partnered with a CBO that has over 2 decades of experience in translating technical to non-technical audiences when it comes to energy topics. The Clean Energy Project, we're leaning heavily on their knowledge, and we're learning together while translating all these concepts into non-technical concepts. So we can share them in what we have called our non-technical venue, the community workshops. And always with the focus of who lives inside of our territory, like demographics, understand the needs of people. So for DSP Part 2, the requirements that call for community engagement are develop a community needs assessment process. And I think it's more like co-develop a community needs assessment process. So we're figuring it out with community and co-creating non-wire solutions with community. All that is also, like an interpretation. Reviewing needs in grid needs and community needs and investments with community. And the way that we are approaching these requirements is use the practices outlined in our community engagement plan. As I referred on the previous slides, we're leaning on our CBOs to teach us, and we are exploring non-wire solutions and learning together. Many of the comments that were submitted on our DSP Part 1 and prior we filed DSP Part 1 were referring to co-creation and co-development. And to be honest, it's been hard to explore what those words mean in reality. When you are in a room, it means everybody's participating in one room. There's no anyone leading. And sometimes that's even confusing for the people that are in the room that want very clear outcomes. When you're co-creating, I think that you have to be softer on those expectations. The outcomes are going to be part of a process of a co-creation. So it's not something that you can decide on an outline, on an agenda, on a workshop. So we are leaning into discomfort and figuring it out together. And what does equity mean for CBOs? Andy was talking about, we have data sets and there's all these variables that talk about equity, that speak about equity. And we are on this other venue, we're going more bottom up and hearing what does equity mean in energy equity mean for CBOs, and how can it be applied to the energy space? So we're building up knowledge from the bottom up, and we are gonna try to meet it from the top down research that Andy and the team that he's working on is exploring right now when it comes to equity metrics. We're also very interested in hearing what our partner Energy Trust of Oregon is doing on their exploration on an equity metric that could be applied for the state potentially. And how to define community needs. So all of this is in exploration mode, and the way that we have been exploring it is via our workshops. So what are we doing in this commitment that I just stated? Well, we created this non-technical venue that I think it's going to be an ongoing, effort. We will file our DSP Part 2 in August. but this is a long-term commitment, transforming the distribution system planning process and doing people-centered processing is not something you do in one go. So we will be moving along with community at the pace that we all understand these new concepts. So for now, we have a series of workshops, 4 workshops, and we will learn from that process and report on our DSP and continue thereon with what we're hoping is building relationships with community to go deeper on understanding on all these concepts that are happening in our DSP. So the topics that we're currently exploring are energy equity, how does community needs look like, and exploring these non-wire solutions pilot project proposals. And I know for this venue, in my 1-year tenure, almost 1-year tenure with you guys, working, we have been building a lot of technical knowledge. We have a common lexicon. We can speak with all these acronyms. And when you want to be inclusive, you cannot just show up to a non-technical venue and just say non-wire solutions. What does that mean? So you have to start with the building blocks of what does non-wire solutions mean and why does it matter? Why is it relevant to the community to even learn about these terms? So with the help of our partner, the Clean Energy Project, Sherry Bielmark, that has been a rock star, helping us learn through this process. We've been exploring how to explain this in a relevant way, in a more interactive way than what we're doing right now. So we are using a mural board, and we have had some technical attendees showing up there, and they are welcome to add to the conversation. And it's always important to know that that is a non-technical venue, and it might be a little too basic for some of the attendees in this venue, but the other venue is created for that specific reason, to be basic. And if anybody from this room would like to attend the other room, you guys are welcome to add to that basic conversation of building knowledge for the non-technical audiences. So we've been co-developing the community workshops, the content with our CBO partner. And to show our commitment to this work, we have been adding capacity to our team. And I would like to introduce my 2 new colleagues, Samantha Thompson and Wally Brown. So please, would you guys introduce yourselves to our stakeholders?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Samantha Thompson. I work on the distributed resource planning team with Shadia and co. This is week 4 for me, so really excited to be here and attend this workshop. I come from a banking background, over 19 years in the financial services sector. So yeah, I'm really excited to be here, and I am the energy equity partner. So in the future, I will be probably your point of contact for the future community workshops. And I'm also being trained by the lovely Shadia, so she will still be available as we are in this transition period. So look forward to speaking with you all soon.
Thank you, Samantha. Hi, Wally.
Hello, everyone, and happy Wednesday. Can everybody hear me? Are we good? Okay, that's great. All right, I have an elaborate setup. Always like making sure my mic works. My name is Wally Brown. I wear multiple hats, so I'm listed as the principal diversity consultant, and then there's a flip title I have that's like the senior energy equity data analyst. So you all may see me in meetings, or I may be behind the scenes making maps and graphs and a whole bunch of things. But basically, I'll help apply metrics to equity so we can help make our outcomes replicable. So if we do something good, if we put it in terms of metrics, that means that we'll be able to do it again and just replicate successes. And then if we have anything that doesn't go well, if we kind of measure what didn't go well, then we can kind of tweak things for the future. So pleased to meet everyone. Happy Wednesday, and we'll see you around.
Well, thank you, Wally and Samantha, for introducing yourselves to our stakeholders. We will have Samantha and Wally add a lot to this conversation. Very excited to have them. So diving a little bit into these community workshop goals, actually for the people that are in this room, we have been struggling with anchoring ourselves because of what I mentioned before, how hard is co-creating, you know, if we're not leading and determining what is the outcome, what does co-creation mean? But yesterday working with Sherry, we arrived to, we need to have some clear goals. So what are we doing in these workshops? Well, these workshops are for stakeholders to better understand the technical components of the distribution system planning, understand, advise, and advocate. So for PGE to have a more effective process, utilizing methods that at this point we're learning. So what is the best way to communicate with community, you know? Is it through mural board? Do we need to get together? And for now, in our approach, we are interacting with CBOs as the ones that represent community. And in the future, we're hoping that we will evolve our engagement and do outreach all the way to community. But for now, our intention is to build capacity and understanding with our partner CBOs on the topics, and then move into community engagement in the future. So for PGE, we also are conducting a community needs assessment that has to be informed by community and defined by community. Integrate equity with grid needs and have better partnerships. So we're exploring all these in the arena of non-wire solutions. So some of the organizations that have attended to our workshops, this is a sample of the organizations that attended workshop 1, are on this slide, and we're hoping to grow these to other organizations. Of course, this is something that has to be relevant to them. So we understand it's going to be a slow building up of the people and organizations that will represent in this venue. So I just wanted to showcase to you, like reporting back to the main room, as we said in my team, what are some of the topics and how are we talking about these topics in our non-technical venue? So pretty much like topics that we have been talking in this venue, but like trying to figure out how to make it relevant to other people that are non-technical, that don't have the expertise that most of you bring to these meetings. So why does it matter? That has been an anchoring for like creating every single piece of transferable knowledge. Why does it matter to the people that are there? Why do they need to be in that room? Why should they participate in this transformation? And, you know, like basic things, keep the lights on, like safe, keep bills low, and like this transformation of the grid that Andy was talking about. And like some community touch points and opening this very complex planning process and exploring how does it look like with input from community, and anchoring ourselves into definitions that are already there on environmental justice communities, how to bring them into this conversation, and then talking about co-creating in energy equity. So we have been using some anchoring words in these workshops to spark conversation. And as I mentioned to you, we use a mural board that I actually like a lot. Some people get dizzy when you move from one slide to another inside of the board, but it allows for multiple people to interact in an anonymous way. So you can have like shy people say things that otherwise that they would not share. So I have been liking it a lot. Maybe we can explore using that methodology in this room in a later time. But anyway, we've been exploring about like the modern grid, you know, going from one-way power flow to two-way, and new generation sources, cleaner generation sources, and the distribution system, and how there's these DERs, these new tools, and how we are excited to showcase them to everybody, not just the people that know about this technology. So we have some basic examples about like DERs, and on our workshop, on the next workshop, we will be going a little deeper now that we've built all the stepping stones to understand a little bit about what distribution system planning is, and what are non-wire solutions and what are DERs, with the conversation of equity and what does it mean to the constituents of the organizations that have been participating in our workshops. So I think on our next workshop, we will be able to continue further in this conversation. And that's what it is. It's a process, it's a conversation, and we're moving at the pace that everybody in the room understands and wants to move. So for like takeaways that we've heard this far from workshop 1 and 2, we're able to be grouped in these 8 topics, and I would like to share a little bit more about each one of them. When people were talking about community, like CBOs were talking about community benefits, and the human well-being is fundamental to energy equity and must be reflected in solutions. So we're hearing that, and CBOs want EJ communities to benefit from the energy transition and opportunities for workforce. This is not the first time that we hear like the workforce component here. On our next stakeholder meeting, we will invite a team member in PGE that is working on workforce development, and we're using the DSP as this platform where we can start to leverage other efforts that are already happening inside of PGE with what we're hearing. It's needed from our external stakeholders. So very interesting evolution on this collaboration, internal and external. Another very important topic we have been hearing is, it's renter versus owners. We're talking about DERs, and there's this huge divide on ownership and what you can do to your house, who has the decision-making power to make these changes, and the cost burden. So we're hearing all this, and we don't have a solution just yet, but we're hearing and we're sharing this with people inside our company to see how can we address those. Angela, you have a question. Can we hear more about PGE plans to be involved in workforce development? Yes, stay tuned. We have our colleague Brooke that will be presenting on your birthday, June 8th. So there will be our present. So stay tuned. We will have a presentation on workforce development for June.
Okay, I'd love to chat with Brooke ahead of that. There are a lot of already ongoing efforts, and it would be good to make sure we're not duplicating efforts in our coordination.
There you go. Love that. Yeah, no need to duplicate things. I will connect you with Brooke after our meeting.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So then outcomes, like I was mentioning before, co-creation, very, very uncomfortable for all of us, even the people in the room. What does people have what I have been reading in the room is that there's this want of clear goals. What is the outcome of what we're doing? And we're committed to exploring what real co-creation means. And it means we have to believe in the process of what we're creating in that room. And we, as PGE, are a participant in that room. We're learning how to interact in new ways. So collaboration that leads to action. Certainly, that we don't want to be just like hanging out and talking about things just to feel good. We want all the conversations that we're having to lead to action. And we will inform our decisions with all these conversations. And I think another very important thought that we have been hearing is how is PGE going to be using all our feedback? And we are using your feedback to inform how we are answering our DSP requirements. And we are trying to figure out a better way to state that, because we hear everything in these rooms, and then we go back and we iterate on the processes on our work streams. And I think that we can do better on informing each one of you how you have contributed to the evolution of our work. So we're working on creating communication tools to be more transparent with you how we're using your feedback. And another barrier that we were able to identify is funding, financial needs. CBOs are tapped on their time and allocating it to meetings and workshops. Important to get compensated. So that's a barrier that we still are working on. And also on the implementation, when we start talking about DERs and programs, there's a lot of conversation on the financial barriers to participate in programs. And the importance on knowing about all the incentives, rebates, and programs to break these barriers for communities that usually have not been able to participate in using these technologies. We've also been hearing about transparency on regard to PG's processes, responsibilities, our budget, our activities, how do we make rates, how do we make decisions. And throughout this interaction with you in the different venues, we're trying to move out of that black box and showcase to you how our process looks like to the best of our ability. And then transparency also on the customer centric, like the bills, what am I paying for? People are very interested in going a little bit deeper on those things, like bills, or if I'm using a DER, are you collecting data? What are you doing with that? What are you gonna do with that data? So I think that there's a lot to be talked about for people to feel more comfortable about technology entering into their lives, if that's one of the outcomes of this exercise. Also, education and awareness. I think that our workshops are starting to spark what we were hoping they were going to do, this curiosity and connecting why is it relevant to all of us that live inside of the distribution system to participate. Distribution system planning, processes, resilience, new technologies, and ways to work together. So I'm very excited about like that last bullet, the ways to work together. We might have because this whole process, in my opinion, is making all of us to think about new ways to do things that we have been doing for 100 years in a certain way. So it's giving us an opportunity to redesign, rethink, and I think partnering is something that we can do more, create more ownership on this change, on this transformation. So CBOs want to also learn about conservation programs, rebates, and this is for our Energy Trust of Oregon partners. This is what we're hearing in our room, grants, tax credits, new technologies, how to use them, and PG programs. And trust, that's something that we fully acknowledge. Trust is not something that you build overnight. And like I said on a previous slide, this is a long-term commitment. Building relationships is not something that you do overnight. And we will work on this. Our intention is to really take our customers' interest as the best interest. Yeah. So for the people that are interested in attending workshop 3, and I said most of you have this technical knowledge, so be aware it's going to be more basic, and we are not going to make it any more technical to meet the needs of the technical people. So you're welcome to arrive and share your technical knowledge in a non-technical fashion, so we can level the playing field together for everybody. So I have a question from Jenny regarding the co-creation. Considering how technical the concepts are around distribution planning, non-wire solutions, and local value, would it be helpful to create a few scenarios or examples what non-wire solutions could be to spark imagination? You see, we're on the same page, Jenny. We have been thinking about that, but I think that I cannot take the credit for coming with that idea. That was Sherry's idea. She said, I think the best way to walk people through a non-wire solution example is or to walk people through non-wire solutions is using an example. So Jenny, we're going to do exactly that. We thought that going into the level of granularity that we go through, like we did in our last workshop, Nihid was so good going through that process, it might confuse our non-technical audience. So we are high leveling it up, and this is following the advice of Sherry Bildmark with CEP. So next Thursday from 9 to 11 a.m., we will be walking our community CBOs through an example. We have built the stepping stones to understand the process, we think, and we're going to test if we're there. So we will bring non-wire solution. We will bring an identified grid need that could be solved by a non-wire solution, a candidate. And once we have that location, then we're going to go deep into, okay, this is the location, who lives in that location. For that, we're going to be using some variables that we don't want to lock them as equity variables. We just want to say we are showcasing the people that live in the place and hear from community the reaction. And we're going to build an exercise, and this is our intent. So we'll let you know what happens after the workshop. After we identify location, we're going to talk about what are the energy needs from that community. And it's going to be an exercise. So we will brainstorm energy needs. And we have walked in that room before to understand what our grid needs at a high level. So our intention for that workshop is to find that interaction where we can solve with DERs for community needs and grid needs. So we will have a number of megawatts that we have to stack with DERs. And then we will do that with the people in the room, just to build the concept on how does this non-wire solutions could benefit community. And we will identify what are the potential barriers, but we'll let you know how that goes. We're very excited about that. And I think I'm at time. What we're continuing exploring what does co-creation mean, what does equity mean to CBOs, and how it applies to the energy space, and how to define community needs. So that's where we are. We're moving at the pace of community and we want everybody to understand so that they feel how the relevancy, and we want to have a meaningful contribution from them. If you have any thoughts and comments, feel free to send them to me via my email, and I will be happy to share those with the other room that is creating this non-technical venue. With that, I've talked and talked and talked. Does anybody have comments, thoughts, questions? Oh my gosh, I have a room of quiet people. Andy, where are you? All the questions were taken by you. Okay, well, that's my report for you guys, and I'll keep you informed on what happens after we walk through a non-wire solution example next Wednesday. So with that, I would like to invite to the room our next presenter, the Sam Newman and Dr. Steve Nakana. They will share with us about our clean energy plan engagement strategy. So please, let's welcome our next two speakers. Sam, are you in the room? There you are. I think you're muted, Sam. Okay, seems like we're having a little technical difficulties, so bear with us.
Good morning. Whilst we're waiting for Sam, maybe I can take this opportunity to introduce myself.
That sounds like a great way to use the space. Please, Stephen, introduce yourself.
Yes, absolutely. Good morning, everybody. My name is Stephen Akana, and my pronouns are he, him. Just like Wally and Samantha, I recently just joined PGE from the Port of Portland, and I am taking over from Jake Wise, who used to be in my role. And my title right now is Community Outreach Manager, and I'm part of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion team at PGE, and I'll be working closely with this team, and I helped to look at our equity, our community outreach strategy for the clean energy plan. Thank you, and it's a pleasure to meet you, and I look forward to getting to know folks. Sam, I'll pass it to you.
Hey everyone, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. Really sorry about that. I don't actually even have the ability to blame a fire drill. My teams just chose the exact moment to crash that I tried to come off mute. So Thanks for bearing with us. It looks like you all got to meet Dr. Steve Nakana already, so happy about that. And I think this is my first time presenting to this group as well, so I just wanted to introduce myself. My name's Sam Newman, and I'm a member of our Resource and Regulatory Strategy team. So I came on board in November, so it's been a little while now, and I've been tracking these workshops through that time, and also getting up to speed on some of the HB 2021 issues and Clean Energy Plan work that's getting going. So that's the context for today's update. So Steve may have mentioned it, but I'm gonna provide some of the initial overview and then look to Steve to fill in some of the details. And really our objective in presenting this today is to start to do some roadshow and socialization, building off of the foundation that Shadia just presented of how we want to approach the Clean Energy Plan and some of the HB 2021 topics. So Shadia laid a great foundation for us there, and we want to use that as our starting point. So Shadia, you can move to the next slide. Thanks. The topics that we wanted to do are just give a quick update of why we're bringing this Clean Energy Plan presentation into the DSP venue. We then are going to talk a little bit about our conceptual framework for CEP community engagement and for the CBIAG formation. So stay tuned for that acronym. And then lastly, we just want to make sure that we're being transparent about opportunities to learn more and participate. So that is our goal. I think our approach is going to be for me and Steve to mostly present our content and then open it up for discussion. But if you have any clarifying questions or acronyms that I miss, then do jump in as we go. Thanks. So the reason that we wanted to talk about the Clean Energy Plan with this group is because the Clean Energy Plan is a new utility planning document that was directed to the utilities by HB 2021, which I expect everyone here is familiar with, was passed last year. And HB 2021 provides a foundation of legislative language that says what these clean energy plans are going to do. And I kind of transcribed that into the bullets of this slide, but essentially it's asking utilities to define these targets as specified by the legislation, to put forward annual goals that make progress toward the targets, to conduct risk-based examination of resiliency opportunities, to conduct an examination of offsetting fossil fuel energy with community-based renewable energy, to include a demonstration of continual progress toward those goals, and to ensure that the whole thing is aligned with the vision of an affordable, reliable, and clean electric system. So that language is more or less straight out of the legislation. And I think the question it's raised for the utilities and for the commission staff and stakeholders who've been working on this so far is, how does this Clean Energy Plan intersect with both distribution system planning and integrated resources planning? And clearly there's a lot of connectivity and shared work between them. So part of our challenge is trying to figure out what is incremental and where we can leverage existing work and develop processes for our internal staff and our stakeholders and community members that aren't duplicative while rising to the spirit of this, which is a very establishes a lot of leadership for Oregon in these aggressive targets. So with that context, our plan and the legislation kind of provides for this, but it's to align the clean energy plans with the integrated resources plans. And right now, the timing for that would be March 2023. So we are tracking towards that at this point. We can move to the next slide. So I wanted to provide a look at some of the activity and where this is going as a introduction to Steve's comments on our engagement plans. So the first step I highlighted here is that on April 21st, PGE filed a conceptual framework for CEP engagement in docket UM 2225. So for those who aren't following that docket, that is commission staff's docket for investigation into clean energy plans, and it's where staff is developing guidance for how those clean energy plans will be brought forward by the utilities and acknowledged by the commission. And that filing that PGE made, and Pacific Power made a filing that same day, is our draft approach for CEP related engagement. And per staff's schedule in that docket, and you can see this in step 2, we are going to be actively seeking input on that plan that we put forward and filing an update to it by May 18th. So that is really the focus of today's discussion, is how we're getting that feedback and looking for early feedback on the call today and email feedback and follow-up conversations. That's our hope here. So we're gonna...
Sam, there's a question on the chat from Natasha Smith. Where in which dockets is PGE filing its CEP engagement strategy update?
Yeah, thanks, Angela. Thanks, Angela. And Natasha, I think that will also show up in UM 2225. And that'll be on or before May 18th is the plan. Thanks, Shadia. I have the chat open now on my computer, so hopefully I can track comments too. So I just, for steps 3 and 4, it zooms out a lot. Of course, there's going to be a lot of steps in between step 2 and step 3 as depicted here. But step 3 is we implement the CEP engagement activities as we develop the clean energy plan analysis and report and work towards that 2023 filing of the clean energy plan. And related to that, but sort of a different purview, a different swath of topics, we will be launching a community benefits and impacts advisory group beginning in the summer of this year. And that is going to lead to something in 2023 called the PGE Community Benefits and Impacts Advisory Report. And this last point, point 4, is a topic straight out of HB 2021, establishing that utilities will launch these advisory groups to inform the development of these reports. So what we're looking for is to present...
And we have another question on the chat.
Deadline for feedback on our engagement strategy. I mean, it's an informal process, so I think we would like to get early feedback rather than later feedback, but we could certainly accommodate written feedback that comes in before May 11th. And anything after that, I'd request phone or email so that we know it's coming. But I think we can use May 11th as a preferred timing to get input, written input. That would be the deadline for feedback on the engagement strategy. There'll be a whole schedule laid out of how we're developing the clean energy plan with a much longer window. But thanks for the clarifying question. So unless there's other clarifying questions, I am going to hand off to Steve to give an overview of the approach we filed last week and how we see this going, and to start this discussion.
Thank you, Sam. Do you want to move me to the next slide, Shadia? So, good morning again, everybody. The conceptual framework that we developed is really a kind of summarized version of Chapter 3 of the GSP document that was report that PGE has developed, and I believe in partnership with some of, maybe almost all the folks that are here. And our approach, because we were asked to explain how we were going to do our engagement for the clean energy plan, we kind of thought of the best way to explain to the commission was to give them the approach that we're going to take and the steps and the tools and the learnings that we're going to use to actually begin the engagement, as Sam indicated. And some of those values and principles that we are following really were established with in Chapter 3 of the GSP process. And Shadi had shown you a graph of the spectrum of engagement that we are committing ourselves to implement. And key in our thinking in that implementation is asking ourselves what equity means, and in the sense of us looking at equity as both a process in terms of how we engage, how we show up, who we listen, and how we collect feedback, and also an outcome, because we understand that if you are practicing equitable kind of values and practices, whatever it is that you're doing is iterative, but the outcome really is to be able to co-create or come up with solutions that Shadi has indicated in our presentation. And one of the things that we were also kind of asked to focus on is the idea of community resiliency. And I think you heard from our colleague who was mostly talking about system resiliency. So we are trying to also understand what is the relationship between just the traditional or broadened version of resiliency from a community perspective and resiliency when we are talking about operational resilience. And some of the things that we're trying to do at PGE is to ask ourselves, what is the link and relationship between these concepts, especially as it applies to the clean energy plan? So one of the key questions that we want to be, some of the approaches that we want to look at is asking ourselves using an equity kind of lens, because we've been asked to use a community lens, which basically means equity lens, some quick questions around resiliency. So we want to be able to leverage knowledge that has been created to ask ourselves, when we're talking about resiliency, is it's resiliency to whom, to what, and through what? What does that mean? And then also making sure that our understanding of resilience is going to be informed by what community also understands that resiliency, so that we can figure out the intersection between resiliency and what we are and what PGE seeks to basically achieve in terms of the resiliency approach that we've already implemented. And one of the things that we also want to be aware of is we can't do this if we are not embedding a human-centered approach, as we are thinking not only about engagement, but the processes that we want to make sure that we are achieving with our work around engagement. And one of the key things that also came up from the DSP is how do we not only measure our progress of engagement, but also how do we hold ourselves accountable in making sure that we are going to be doing what we set out ourselves to do, and also the impact that we want to see, not just programmatically, but also on the community level. And I'm not sure how many people are here that understand that have come across the results-based accountability that the Government Alliance on Race and Equity has been basically advocating. So we, it was also mentioned in the GSP, we are also going to be using that framework to help us just understand, and as Wally had indicated earlier on, how do we actually measure progress at the programmatic project and then community level in terms of the outcomes that we want to see. So the results-based accountability framework gives us a method on how we can measure progress and then ask ourselves, how well are we doing? Is anyone better off? Those questions will help us to be able not only to be iterative, but also hold ourselves accountable as we are moving through the processes. So the conceptual framework that we filed in for the Clean Energy Plan basically is a summarization of what Chapter 3 of the DSP report basically indicated, and we seek to apply that thinking and the values as we move forward, even for this engagement. And so, and feedback as well will be required as we move ahead. And you can move me to the next slide. And so this is basically, again, a kind of like just the rough starting points of what our engagement is going to look at. These are the strategies that we are going to follow on the left-hand side, basically apply the community engagement framework. That's one strategy that we want to do. What's the outcome for us? Well, we want to be able to co-develop a community lens so that, as I indicated, we want to be able to understand what does resiliency mean in terms of what we want to do around community-based renewables and non-energy renewable benefits for community. And then we have the other strategy that we want to follow. We want to be able to leverage existing work that we already have, our existing partnerships, including these venues, so that we can create or rather provide meaningful opportunities for us to be able to review all the results that we want to be able to achieve from the analytical methods, whether it's through RIP roundtables and DSP partner meetings. And Shadi has also indicated we want to be able to not only just listen to community, but engage in a profound way. And one of the ways that we understand, and Shadi indicated, is like it takes time. We take time from community. We leverage not only their lived experience, but their knowledge. That's valuable. And if it's valuable, well, it has to be compensated like you would compensate anyone who's a consultant. So we want to be able to treat our community partners as consultants that give us something of value. And if we value it, then we gotta pay for that value. And that value compensation can be looked at in a number of ways, transportation, the amount of money that we decide to pay for how long and whenever we engage folks. And so those are the things that really our conceptual framework has described that we are going to do. And one of the things that is also asked, and Sam has indicated, is we also been asked to create what is called to be a community benefit and impact advisory. The creation of that group, we are going to need a lot of help and input from everybody in this room and other folks that we have not been able to engage or contacted on. And so even the creation of that advisory group, we're going to need some input and help in getting that done. Any questions before I ask to move to the next slide? I think I was supposed to finish at 11:35. Sorry.
We're good on time. We're good on time.
Okay. Next slide. Shadia, can you talk more specifically about how the feedback and outcomes from engagement gets integrated in the RFP and CFP? Is it an iterative process? Sam, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I can answer that it definitely is an iterative process, and it's a process that we are building now, and we're trying to take what's worked in the DSP and apply that approach as much as we can to the CEP. And like you say, Joshua, or like you allude, the IRP analysis is a key input to what's going to be put forward in the CEP as well. And I know you're following the UM 2225 docket and the options proposed by staff there for how the IRP, the DSP, and the CEP all are linked. But what we're trying to do with the approach that is outlined on this slide is be mindful of the fact that there are existing venues and work streams going, for the modeling work and the input data work and the candidate resources. A lot of that work is being developed through these venues. So our CEP engagement is going to focus on those venues and expand the opportunities for people to provide input through those venues in the spirit of these engagement strategies. So maybe more of a long answer than you needed, but it is iterative is probably the short answer. Steve, I don't know if you have anything you'd add to that.
Yeah, no, thank you for making that link. And yeah, honestly, the word iterative comes up a lot in our framework because it also means, as we indicated, that we accept that equity, especially if you're using an equity lens, is a process and an outcome. If it's a process, being iterative, you learn, you implement, you adapt, you try, and so thank you for that. And this slide that we have here basically is just a kind of proposed way that we want to continue in with the work, especially with this, the community benefits advisory group formation. So the conceptual framework really that we have, we wanted to be able to inform the formation of this group. And the proposed areas of focus that the group will be working on is to review and consult on PGE's biannual community benefits and impacts report development, because that has to happen. And then advise on community priorities and community engagement needs for PGE systems and plans, and specifically, as you heard from Sam, on the RFP, DSP, and that there is CEP work. So more to come on the planning cycles for that, but we want to be able to make sure that community engagement or community feedback and input is really, even though it's going to be across multiple topics, we are able to keep a close eye on how things intersect. And so we want to be able to look to this group to help us with developing a structure for the CBIAG, or the Community Impacts and Advisory Group, because we think this will be a very good forum for us to begin to start that work. Thank you. We have another slide that I gotta touch on. Shadia, you wanna move to the next slide? Sam, you wanna take that one? If there's no questions.
Sure. I'm not seeing any questions in chat right now, so I'll just cover this slide and then open it up. So start thinking about your questions and be ready. But just to recap what we've been talking about here, the Clean Energy Plan is coming, and our approach is to build on the DSP work to develop this broader roadmap and really use the DSP analysis and process as inputs to what's going to show up in the CEP. The CBIAG will have a broader lens of PGE's approaches to communities and to public engagement, and we're in the process of considering what format that makes sense to bring to the communities, and we're seeking input on both of those. So we have 15 minutes here. I know I can stay on if there's a robust discussion going, but I can't speak for everyone. But I think our intent is you can send written comments to me, you can send ideas to me, you can send requests to meet to me, and I'll be a point of coordination for bringing our team together and managing our response to that. So
we have time if anybody would like to voice their questions or type them in the chat. We are running on time, so there's space for questions. And if we don't have questions, that's okay too.
So should we assume that this group will help us with the? Let's give it a given.
We have a question from Sylvia Tanner. Sylvia.
Thank you, Shadia. Sorry, I'm like trying to process all that you said. So this is kind of like a question information as I'm saying it. But one of the things I heard you say, I believe it was you, Sam, is that at least for now, you know, advisory group formation, you're trying to be mindful of existing venues and work streams. And you're thinking about CMP engagement, focusing on those existing venues and expanding opportunities for people to provide input in those venues. And so specifically for IRP, which I know the IRP team has been trying for a while to be thoughtful about how to make the venue more accessible. But, you know, but there's room to grow, I think, by virtue of the venue and the kind of requirements to engage in the venue. How are you thinking about, you know, creating a space within IRP so that people can actually, you know, people who are not there, you know, on the daily and kind of breathing it can actually successfully engage and provide you the feedback from a community lens perspective?
Yeah, thanks for that question. And I heard that discussion from you and others loud and clear coming through in the workshop that the commission staff held on the CEP planning framework last week as well. And so it's been on our mind. And really, as a first comment, I would just say we're open to ideas as people like you who've been engaged on and off in the IRP or have tried to engage but not been successful. To the extent you can help us think through what good would look like, I think we want to have that discussion and we want to hear from you. One idea we have that I think is pretty tied to what Shadia was just presenting is the way that our DSP engagement work has broken out the work into these partner meetings and then also to the community workshops. And there's a finite number of DSP community workshops, but we are interested in feedback on how well that approach is working and the approach to developing common knowledge and ability to engage, and then bringing some of the CEP topics in to the extent the agenda permits in those meetings, or extending that series are both on the table as options we're thinking about. But we haven't formalized anything yet, so sort of
Hey, Sam.
Yes.
Sam, this is Angela Long. Can I jump in for a minute?
Please
Sylvia, I think this is a really great question, and I just want to be really transparent with this team and say that, you know, we recognize internally that we have a lot of efforts going on and they're not always aligned. And one of the things we're really trying to do through the DSP is take the learnings that we have and use those in other areas of our planning, whether it's the TE plan or multi-year plan, the CEP. There's a lot of that happening now. And so we're trying to bring in guest speakers from other areas of the business to talk about what they're doing as it relates to the DSP. But then we also have an internal group that is focused on making sure that all of our different plans align and that we have one story that's being told holistically between all of them. So it's easier for our stakeholders. I sit in that alignment group. And so I think maybe many of you have noticed I've started to take a little bit of a step back from the DSP. I'm still observing and paying attention and taking the information that you have and making sure that it funnels into the clean energy plan, the multi-year plan. And so I hope through these efforts that we'll have a better streamlined process in the next, you know, over the next year or so. I think we're still learning, and so it's going to be a little bit of a long journey, but we'll keep you posted on our efforts there. Is that helpful, Sylvia?
Yes, thank you, Angela. Thank you, Sam. Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, like for a long time, I've been thinking how like central the IRP is to everything the utility does. It fits into all of these other streams, right? It sets, you know, avoided costs for all kinds of streams that really make it so central. And you know, like the IRP, how can the IRP be a vehicle for energy justice is one of those things that, you know, like we're all, I mean, that we're all trying to crack in a sense, because it's not clear just given how the RP is so square, but it's so important. And so I appreciate hearing about the effort to bring lessons from the DSP experience into this conversation. I appreciate hearing about this alignment team. I didn't know about this. And I do think that PG is well positioned to kind of set a model for other utilities in the region and, you know, potentially nationally, because you're willing to try new things. And but yeah, like I'm interested in this conversation. I don't have answers. I have more questions. Like it was a true question. Like, how are you thinking about this? Because it's so important. It's something that, you know, I struggle with a lot, like in terms of how do we make sure that this House Bill 2021 implementation is not just going to lead us to clean energy, which is really important, but also to, you know, a just transition. And I think the RP plays a role, but I don't know exactly how to connect the dots yet. So yeah, I'm very appreciative of this conversation.
Sylvia, one thing I didn't mention is that the analysts that sit on the DSP team are cross-training with the IRP team, so we can understand their systems and how they work and how we might be able to streamline processes and also integrate socioeconomic and demographic data across those two forms. And then Wally and Samantha will also be working on the IRP team as well, cross-functionally, so they should be able to share some learnings there.
Very cool. Thank you.
We have a question from Marley.
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Perfect. Thank you for this presentation and updates on both DSP and CEP. I was just going to say, we have a coalition of folks who have are both part of community-based orgs that have been working with PGE and other utilities, as well as non-CBOs, but still advocates who closely track DSP, CEP, and IRP work. And we meet bi-weekly. Our next meeting is on May 6th, and that's we're specifically focused on CEP in that coalition right now. So if there's interest, Sam and Stephen, in coming in and maybe spending 15 to 20 minutes and giving the group your sort of holistic view on the CBIAG or any other relevant information pertaining to CEP, we would love that and welcome that. And we will have prepared some questions and some input and insight for y'all, if that's something that you're interested in. I'll send up a follow-up email, so if that's something that is of interest and could be helpful, then maybe we can get that set up. You can come in 15 or 20 minutes, depending on how much information you're willing to share, either before, at the beginning of the meeting or at the end. So I will send that information. I see Sam nodding, so that's a good sign. And Stephen with a thumbs up.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm humbled.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, just send me an email and we can coordinate that, and let us know if there's if you have suggestions for how we frame it for that audience or anything, but we'll use what we said today as a starting point, unless we can coordinate. But that's exactly what we want to do, is get the word out and talk to your group and other community groups that are connected. So perfect.
Okay, sounds good. I'll send more information after this through email.
And to me, that is in the spirit of that iterative approach that we were being asked. So whatever opportunity comes our way, we'll definitely take folks on, because we are serious about this.
Perfect. And we do see that. So we appreciate it. Thank you, Stephen.
And I'll just say, Jenny, I see your comment in the chat also, which doesn't look like a question, but I give it a thumbs up as you come up to speed on this, and as you have ideas and are trying to get engaged, let me know if there's anything you're looking for in particular or you want to discuss further.
There was a comment in there, Sam. I'm not sure if that's what you responded to. I'm not as familiar with the CEP docket and work streams, and we need better understanding on how that relates to engaging most effectively. Maybe we can have a slide that shows the relationship in one of our presentations later on, or maybe we can follow up and just help people understand the linkages and what we are trying to achieve.
Yeah, I think that'll be an ongoing
I thought I
discussion.
saw.
Go ahead, Nancy.
Sam, I thought I saw Caroline Moore on this call. I don't know if we want to ask the PUC if they have any comments around the CEP and how they're coordinating those efforts, or invite them to provide context. I don't know if she's still on the call.
Yeah, sure. Not to put anyone on the spot, but if you have anything you want to add, have some time here for a couple minutes.
Hey, yeah, this is Caroline. I didn't catch this entire presentation. I just popped on recently, so I probably can't say anything that helpful or profound right now, other than I'm happy to talk to anyone, Jenny or anyone, about what we're trying to pull together on our end of this. And also, Marley, I know that you guys have talked to Michelle before, and can continue to loop her in if you want, like, PUC staff to help support any of your coalition meetings. But sorry, nothing super profound right now. I'm still getting up to speed on the discussion. Really happy to talk with anyone, though. You can just talk to me or Michelle or both.
Great. Thank you, Caroline.
Well, Shadi, I think we'll hand it back to you.
Yeah.
Thank you, folks, for having me and Sam. I totally appreciate the space you afforded us.
Thank you for coming to our meeting and sharing all the insights of the Clean Energy Plan engagement strategy. Looking forward to seeing how this evolves. So we have arrived to the end of our meeting. Thank you for hanging in there for 3 hours with our team. We appreciate all your thoughtful contributions and comments. We will follow up with you on some conversations that were sparked during this meeting. And we look forward to seeing you on our next meeting. I will be sending the updated slides, since we did a couple of tweaks this morning, to the presentation that I sent you last night. And I will have that uploaded to our website, our PGDSP website, as well as with this video divided by chapters so that you can access specific topics. And for our next meeting in June, we will be sending you out an agenda. If there's any changes to the one that we have here as a draft, please keep in touch. We love our conversation, and having you as key members of this transformation of our distribution system planning process. So thank you. Have a great day, and we'll see you soon. Let's keep in touch. Bye.